Hello and welcome to IAMC Radio and Podcast. Today we'll explore the top news headlines for March 20th. It's quite a mix.
Yeah.
We've got political shakeups in Nigeria and some concerning developments in Turkey. We'll also touch on the Russia-Ukraine war and look at some interesting shifts happening in international relations in Africa. Plus, a major drug bust in Ghana, and even an aviation incident that's raising some eyebrows. So buckle up, it's a busy day in the news.
It seems like every corner of the world has a story to tell today.
Absolutely.
And what's striking is how these internal political happenings can have such huge ripple effects.
Right.
It's not just about what's going on within a country's borders, but how those actions impact their international relations and even the global economy.
Yeah, that's a great point.
We're seeing that play out in a few different places in today's news.
Okay, well, let's start with Nigeria. It looks like the political scene is already gearing up for the 2027 elections. Former Vice President Atiku Abubakar just announced that he's forming a coalition to challenge President Bola Tinubu. And this includes some big names like Peter Obi and former Governor Nasir El-Rufai. This all came out of a press conference in Abuja. But get this, the press conference was actually supposed to be about the state of emergency in Rivers State. Talk about a turn of events.
So it sounds like this coalition building really took center stage.
Yeah, it did.
And the fact that all these big players in the opposition were there, even if it was for a different reason initially, it really shows how seriously they're taking this.
Right.
Atiku even came right out and said that this coalition is aiming to be the main opposition force in 2027. That's a pretty clear signal of their strategy.
It is.
And there are even reports about discussions involving Abubakar Malami, and there's talk that Pastor Tunde Bakare might join the Social Democratic Party too.
Wow.
Especially after El-Rufai just recently switched to the SDP. It'll be really interesting to see if they can pull this off.
Okay, so we've got political maneuvering in Nigeria, but things seem a lot more tense over in Turkey.
Yeah.
Istanbul Mayor Ecram Imamoglu, who's seen as a major rival to President Erdogan, and probably the main opposition candidate in the 2028 election, well, he was just detained on corruption charges.
Oh, wow.
And you can imagine the reaction. There's a lot of anger and protests breaking out.
Makes sense.
People are saying this is purely political. Some are even going so far as to call it a dictatorship.
Yeah.
And it's not just Imamoglu. Apparently over 100 of his associates have also been detained.
Wow.
And a lot of them are from the CHP.
The Republican People's Party.
Yeah, the main opposition party. This whole thing just doesn't look good.
It really casts a shadow over the fairness of the upcoming elections.
Absolutely.
And then you see the economic impact. The Turkish lira has hit record lows against the dollar and the euro.
Yeah, it's a huge blow.
It shows just how fragile the economic situation is over there and how sensitive it is to any kind of political instability.
Well, it's like everyone's holding their breath to see what happens next.
Yeah, the comparisons people are drawing to past military coups are pretty unsettling.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and go back to Nigeria, but this time we're talking about the economy. There's a lot of anxiety right now in the oil sector, specifically the downstream oil sector.
Okay.
There are reports saying that the Dangote refinery, the massive one that everyone's been talking about, might actually stop supplying petroleum products to the Nigerian market.
That's a big deal.
It is.
Yeah. Why would they do that?
Well, apparently it's because they're having trouble renegotiating the narrow for crude deal with the NNPC.
The Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited.
Yeah, exactly.
So what are they going to do with all that fuel?
Well, that's the interesting part. It seems like they might just keep exporting it.
Really?
Because those transactions are done in US dollars.
Right.
It's like they're saying it's easier to deal in dollars.
So this whole situation with Dangote has the potential to really shake things up.
Oh, yeah.
Fuel supply, fuel prices, it could get messy.
And it's all tied to this narrow for crude agreement,
Well,
which was actually designed to reduce their dependence on foreign currency.
to make it easier to buy fuel domestically. And it was working for a while. Prices actually went down a bit because Dangote and the NNPCL were competing.
But if this deal falls apart, it could all go back to the way it was, or even worse.
Yeah, it's a lot of uncertainty.
Now, a spokesperson for the Dangote Group did say that they're not aware of any plans to stop supplying Nigeria, but the NNPCL has confirmed that they are in discussions about a new contract. So clearly something's going on.
Yeah, something's definitely up.
And it highlights the challenges of trying to manage an economy with two currencies, especially one as large and complex as Nigeria's.
For sure.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture in Africa. Specifically, there are some interesting changes happening in international relations.
Okay.
Mali just announced that they're pulling out of the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie.
The OIF?
Yeah, the OIF.
That's a pretty big move.
It is, and they're following in the footsteps of their neighbors, Niger and Burkina Faso.
Both of which are under military rule right now.
Exactly.
What's Mali's reason for leaving?
Well, they said that the OIF's actions were, quote, incompatible with constitutional principles.
Interesting.
Specifically principles related to state sovereignty.
So they're basically saying the OIF is stepping on their toes?
That's one way to put it.
But this isn't Mali's first run-in with the OIF.
You're right.
They were actually suspended back in 2020 after their own military coup.
Right, so there's a history there.
And now with Burkina Faso and Niger also distancing themselves from France, and all three of them leaving ECOWAS.
The Economic Community of West African States.
Exactly. It paints a pretty clear picture.
It does.
They're trying to forge their own path away from traditional Western alliances.
It's like a whole new power dynamic is emerging in the Sahel region.
Exactly, and they're not just talking the talk, they're even getting rid of French colonial names from streets and squares in their capitals.
It's a powerful statement.
It is.
A real assertion of their own identity.
And for our listeners who might not be familiar with the OIF, it's an organization that focuses on promoting the French language and cooperation among its member states. They've got 93 member states in total.
Okay, so from shifting alliances in Africa, let's turn our attention to the ongoing conflict in Europe. The Russia-Ukraine war is still a major point of concern.
Absolutely.
And German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius just made some pretty pointed remarks. He doesn't seem too convinced about Russia's commitment to peace, even though they agreed to a limited ceasefire. He thinks Putin is playing a game.
Interesting.
And he even suggested that President Trump won't be able to stay on the sidelines much longer.
So he's basically saying that the U.S. might have to get more involved.
Yeah, it sounds like he's expecting a shift in U.S. policy.
And these comments came after reports of overnight strikes on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, even after Putin and Trump had that phone call.
Remember, Trump has been trying to broker some kind of peace deal?
Right. But Pistorius' skepticism seems to be shared by a lot of people. It's hard to believe Russia's sincere about de-escalation when they say they'll stop attacking energy infrastructure.
Yeah.
But then they keep hitting other civilian targets.
It just makes you question their motives.
And to make things even more complicated, both Russia and Ukraine are accusing each other of launching fresh air attacks, right after they supposedly agreed to this limited ceasefire.
It just shows how volatile the situation is and how quickly things can change.
For sure.
Okay, now, back here in the U.S., we got our own drama unfolding. This time, it's between the executive and judicial branches.
Oh.
Chief Justice John Roberts had some strong words for President Trump. Trump called for the impeachment of a federal judge. And Roberts basically told him to back off.
Wow.
He said impeachment isn't the way to deal with disagreements over judicial rulings.
Which is a pretty fundamental principle of our system.
It is. And he emphasized that we have an appellate review process for a reason.
Right, there's a whole system in place for a reason.
So what sparked this whole thing? Well, a district judge named James Boasberg put a temporary hold on some deportation flights. These were flights for alleged legal migrants. And Trump was not happy about it at all.
So he called for the judge's impeachment?
Yeah, he even called Boasberg a radical left lunatic.
Oh boy.
And said that Boasberg shouldn't be overruling his immigration policies.
It's a pretty bold move to publicly criticize a judge like that.
It is.
And for Roberts to step in and rebuke the president, that's not something you see every day.
It shows how seriously he takes the separation of powers.
And the independence of the judiciary.
Now, the legal justification for these deportation flights was the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. But there are some questions about whether it was properly applied. There haven't been any details released confirming that these individuals were actually gang members, or that they were in the country illegally.
So it raises concerns about due process.
Yeah, were they given a fair chance to plead their case?
And to make matters even more complicated, a Republican lawmaker has said that they're going to introduce impeachment articles against Judge Boasberg.
So this fight is far from over.
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
Okay, let's move on to some news out of Ghana. There's been a significant drug bust. A 56-year-old Nigerian national named Uchechukwu Chima was arrested for alleged drug trafficking.
Okay.
This was the result of an intelligence operation by Ghana's Narcotics Control Commission, NAH. They found a huge stash of cocaine,
How much are we talking?
about 192 kilograms,
That's a lot.
plus a smaller amount of heroin.
Yeah.
The street value is estimated to be around $2.1 million US.
Or about 3.2 billion in Nigerian naira.
It's a major seizure.
And it sounds like this guy was on their radar.
He was. NAC said he was linked to previous drug seizures and arrests.
So they've been building a case against him.
And this bust is a big win for them.
It's a serious blow to the drug trade. NACC even said that taking these drugs off the streets will save millions of lives. That really puts it into perspective.
It does.
It shows the devastating impact of the drug trade and the importance of these law enforcement efforts.
Okay, our last headline for today is about an incident that happened back in January. It involves a United Airlines Boeing 787 flight that was traveling from Lagos to Washington, D.C.
Okay.
But while they were flying over Côte d'Ivoire, the plane experienced a technical malfunction.
Uh-oh.
And 16 passengers were injured. The National Transportation Safety Board,
The NTSB?
the NTSB just released their findings. And it turns out that both the left and right inertial reference units failed.
Inertial reference units, what are those exactly?
They're a critical part of the plane's navigation system. They help the plane figure out where it is and which way it's going.
So if those fail, that's a big problem.
It's a huge problem.
Oh.
Because when they failed on this flight, it caused the autopilot to disengage.
Oh, no.
And the plane started making sudden altitude changes. Up and down pretty dramatically.
That's been terrifying.
I can't even imagine. And to make matters worse, this all happened at 36,000 feet.
Yeah.
While they were serving meals.
So people were probably up and about, moving around.
Yeah, it would have been chaos. The flight ended up having to turn back to Lagos. And now investigators are looking into what caused this double failure.
Yeah, they've retrieved the flight recorders, which is like the black box of the plane. They should be able to piece together exactly what happened.
Hopefully this investigation will lead to some important safety recommendations.
To prevent this from happening again.
Exactly.
It's a good reminder that even with all our technology, things can still go wrong.
Well, this has been a whirlwind of news.
It has.
From political power plays to economic anxieties, international conflicts, and even a reminder that technology isn't always perfect. It's a lot to take in.
When you step back and look at all these events together, there's a common thread running through them.
What's that?
The idea of power and how it shifts and changes.
Whether it's between political rivals, economic forces, or even countries on the global stage.
Understanding those dynamics is key to understanding the world around us.
That's a great takeaway.
It's not just about the headlines, it's about the forces that shape those headlines.
And on that note, thank you for listening to today's top news headlines on IAMC Radio and Podcast.